Welcome back to our channel, friends. Today's thrilling tale has an ending that left me speechless. Imagine confronting an entire alien council, armed only with your courage and the truth you've risked your life to expose. Our protagonist, Seth, and the fierce red-skinned General Neyvara stand side by side in a moment of absolute defiance. But what happens when the council decides their fate? Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this epic showdown. Subscribe to the channel to support and catch more incredible stories like this one. And don't forget to comment below. Where are you listening from, and what do you think about Seth and Neyvara's alliance? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Blood splattered the polished metal floor as Seth felt his jaw explode in white-hot pain, his head snapping to the side from the guard's punishing blow. In that instant, he knew without question he might not survive until dawn, because these captors had carefully orchestrated every ounce of brutality they dispensed. The room, encased in metallic walls and filled with an unnatural chill, made him feel both claustrophobic and exposed. Two guards circled him like predators, hulking, muscle-bound figures in slate-colored armor, each carrying a neural lash designed to assault the nervous system with precision pulses. A single flick of those devices could send him reeling into convulsions, yet something in him refused to bow. "Talk," hissed the closest guard, his voice rasping through a half-raised visor. The stench of stale sweat and the metallic tang of blood hung in the air. Seth, arms strapped to a bolted chair in the center of the room, glared up with a crooked grin. His short, dark hair stuck to his forehead, damp with sweat, and a fresh line of crimson trickled from the corner of his lips. "I'd rather choke on my own tongue," he snarled. He spat, and the guard's expression twisted into fury. Another punishing hit rocked Seth's ribcage, but he refused to give them the satisfaction of a scream. The second guard's glare was unsympathetic as he paced behind Seth, neural lash crackling with unspent energy. "You humans always end up spilling your secrets. Just a matter of time," the guard said, venom in each word. Seth coughed, spat out blood, and rasped, "Guess I missed that mandatory briefing." His reward was a new wave of burning agony across his left shoulder, enough to make spots dance before his vision. Hours of interrogation had left him bruised and bleeding, yet he clung to defiance like a lifeline. He could sense that their frustration was mounting. They wanted him broken, pliable, ready to trade scraps of intel for mercy. But Seth had already burned the data. After he'd done something much riskier, he'd stolen secrets that belonged to someone very high up in the chain of command, someone who might kill him for it or, strangely enough, keep him alive for it. A whisper of movement drew his attention to a side door. A slender figure in the same slate armor entered. "You're lucky the new general wants you breathing," the figure murmured. A jolt shot through Seth's gut. The new general? The words rattled around in his head, stirring up half-formed rumors he'd heard in the barracks before he was captured. He hadn't even thought the person at the top, some legendary commander, would personally intervene. Yet if the rumor was true, she was no ordinary officer. She was rumored to be from a rarely seen lineage on her planet, red-skinned and keen-eyed, rumored to be ruthless on the battlefield and even more unyielding in negotiations. He tried to make sense of his predicament, ignoring the exhaustion that threatened to drag him under. The guard leaned in, voice low so the other two wouldn't hear. "General Neyvara changed your status from eliminate immediately to valuable intelligence asset. That's your lifeline. Don't waste it." Seth's response was a weak grin, accompanied by another drizzle of blood from his split lip. "You're so kind," he said sarcastically, but his mind was racing. Why would Neyvara, an infamous alien commander rumored to blaze across war zones like living fire, bother rescuing a human spy she'd never met? Minutes or hours later, the door opened again with a hushed, mechanical hum. This time, he felt the air shift before he even looked up. She strode in, flanked by an underling who peeled away to stand by the far wall. General Neyvara was taller than he had expected, her posture exuding authority tempered by lethal precision. Her hair was a deep onyx, falling in a sleek line at her jaw, contrasting the crimson hue of her skin in a way that made her presence almost hypnotic. She wore a slender uniform that showcased her high rank, each seam a testament to discipline. Though Seth's bruised eyes struggled to focus, he sensed something intense in the way she surveyed him, like a scientist deciding whether a test subject was worth saving or best left to die. "You're the one keeping me alive?" he croaked, voice cracking from dehydration and pain. Her scarlet gaze fixed on him, and for an instant he felt as though she could see straight through his flesh to the secrets hidden within. "Alive is a relative term," she replied icily. "But yes, I had orders to do otherwise." Quick check. Have you been reading long enough to form an opinion? Comment 1 if you like the tension so far. Comment 2 if you're craving more background details. Seth tried to laugh, but every movement of his torso unleashed another wave of agony. "So I'm an asset?" he managed, forcing out the words through clenched teeth. General Neyvara's red skin glimmered under the harsh light, and the muscles in her jaw tightened. "That depends on whether you're willing to be useful," she said, stepping closer until she towered over him. "I'm told you're stubborn, skilled, and have certain knowledge that could shift entire battles." He raised his eyebrows, ignoring the copper taste of blood in his mouth. "You say that like you're hoping to recruit me, not just interrogate me." She didn't deny it. Instead, she tapped a slender device at her hip, a neural disruptor by the look of it. "Give me a reason to keep you breathing," she said. "I need to know exactly what you did with the stolen data." "I burned my copy," Seth lied, letting his gaze dart from the device to her unwavering stare. "Didn't want your goons to get their hands on it." "Interesting," she murmured, though she didn't look convinced. "If that's the case, how did you access my personal entries embedded in those files?" Every muscle in Seth's body tightened. So she knew. He had glimpsed top-secret references to Neyvara's rank, her battlefield record, and more tellingly, transcripts hinting that her own government suspected she might be disloyal. "I didn't see enough to memorize," he said carefully. She tilted her head, and even from the battered chair, he caught the subtle flicker of agitation in her expression. He'd hit a nerve. For all her commanding presence, she was juggling precarious loyalties behind closed doors. The question was why? Without warning, she turned on her heel and walked to the door, her uniform boots clicking with lethal grace. "Unlock him," she ordered the guards. One guard, the brutish one with a shaved head, hesitated. "General?" "That's an order," Neyvara repeated, not even looking back. "Ma'am," the guard stammered, stepping forward to disengage the restraints. Seth felt cold metal loosen around his wrist. He was free, but he wasn't foolish enough to stand abruptly. Instead, he willed his aching limbs to hold him upright as he slowly got to his feet, uncertain what came next. "Follow me," Neyvara said, her tone brooking no argument. Seth's first few steps were wobbly, but his instincts, honed from a dozen infiltration missions, told him to hide his weakness. The general led him down a stark corridor, illuminated by overhead lights that buzzed faintly. As they walked, her subordinates cast sidelong glances, uncertain whether he was a prisoner or something else. Neyvara stopped at a dim side passageway, input a code into a hidden panel, and gestured for him to enter a small lift. The doors slid closed, sealing the two of them into claustrophobic silence. Seth braced himself against one wall, trying to keep his battered frame from collapsing. "Why the change of heart, General?" he asked, meeting her gaze in the polished metal reflection. "One minute they're torturing me, the next you're playing rescuer." She seemed to consider his question as the lift hummed downward. Perhaps, she said softly. I prefer to interrogate you myself. I have questions that require more subtle answers than the brutes in that chamber could extract. He barked a bitter laugh. So you want me in one piece, is that it? She turned, and he caught a glimpse of something flickering behind her measured calm, some deeply buried frustration or fear. If the rumors are true, she began, you know exactly why I can't let my superiors get their hands on what you found. What rumors? Seth pressed, though he had his suspicions. Her crimson eyes locked onto his. That certain powers want me removed, by any means necessary. Call it a purge, a consolidation of authority, or a betrayal from the very people I've bled for. If you really read those sealed records, then you know how fragile my position is. Seth noted the tension in her words, the way her hand clenched into a fist. Yeah, he said. I noticed something in those files, a special marking by your name indicating you'd be expendable if you ever stepped out of line. The elevator lurched to a stop. Neyvara shoved the door open, her eyes never leaving his. Welcome to my personal safe room, she said, sweeping her arm to indicate the subterranean space. Low recessed lights outlined a functional living area, weapon racks along the walls, and a sealed med chest near a cot. You survive only as long as I allow it, she warned, but you're safer here than you are anywhere else on this planet. The moment Seth entered the safe room, he felt the tension coiling between them like a live wire. The hum of hidden machinery fed fresh oxygen into the enclosed space, and an unsettling hush replaced the typical clamor of a military facility. With the flick of a switch, Neyvara locked the door behind them, the hiss of hydraulics signaling no one could barge in unannounced. Even as battered and exhausted as he was, Seth's mind kept racing. He perched on a low metal stool, arms resting heavily on his knees. Neyvara grabbed a handheld med scanner from the chest, then stalked over with that perfectly balanced stride. Stay still, she said, voice clipped. Her slender red fingers manipulated the device over his bruised ribs. Despite the danger, he found himself studying her face. High cheekbones, eyes narrowed in concentration, and beneath her precise composure, a swirl of anger and something else. Uncertainty, maybe? Aren't you worried your government will track you down here? Seth asked, trying to break the tension. Her lips curved into a mirthless half smile. They don't know this place exists. I only use it when I need to keep certain operations off the record. Seth let out a humorless chuckle, then flinched as the scanner whined, indicating a mild fracture on his fourth rib. Lucky me. So, am I an operation or an asset? You might be both, she replied evenly, wrapping a med strand around his torso. The band glowed, administering micro sutures to damaged tissue. He winced at the slight burning sensation, but forced himself to speak. You know, if I wanted to blow your cover, I could just share what I discovered about your chain of command with a rival faction. Might earn me a ticket home, maybe even a medal. Neyvara's hand paused. You wouldn't make it off-world in one piece, she said quietly. And you know that. Her honesty startled him. It wasn't bravado. It felt more like a grim acceptance, and somehow that made him respect her. She resumed applying the med strand. Where are you reading this from, by the way? Let us know. It's always fun to see how far this story travels. Don't forget to comment your location below. Hours later, Seth still couldn't fully process the abrupt shift in his fortunes. One day, he was a captive, tortured for intel, and the next, he was huddled in a secret bunker with the very commander whose name headlined half the stolen data. He dozed intermittently on the narrow cot while Neyvara cross-referenced console readouts by the glow of a single overhead light. Shadows stretched along the reinforced walls, underscoring the clandestine hush of this place. Several times, Seth roused to the sound of her muttered curses in a language he didn't recognize. A sure sign the data verified what he'd told her. Her own superiors wanted her gone. At last, when the overhead lights flickered to artificial dusk, Neyvara rubbed the bridge of her nose and turned to him. I hate to admit this, she said, but those files are worse than I feared. Not only have they flagged me, they've authorized my disposal should loyalty concerns arise. Code words for kill me when convenient. Seth sat up, pain flaring beneath his ribs. So, you see now I wasn't bluffing. She paced, eyes never leaving the console. I see a government that's either been compromised or grown paranoid enough to devour its own best soldiers. I've given them victory after victory, and now they see me as a liability. He could almost taste the bitterness in her voice. What's your next move? Neyvara turned, crossing her arms. Officially, I still have command privileges until they decide to revoke them. I can still walk into high security areas without question. She gestured to the console. But once I start hunting the architects of this betrayal, they'll respond with lethal force. So if I disappear you from custody altogether and partner with you, partner? Seth echoed, raising an eyebrow. She gave him a sharp glance. We might have a chance to expose the corruption at the top and keep ourselves alive. And it sounded absurd. A human spy forging an alliance with a red-skinned general of an alien regime that had locked him up mere hours ago. Yet something about Neyvara's fierce resolve, the unwavering glint in her eyes, made him believe she'd protect him in a firefight. Maybe that was enough. They set out before dawn, sneaking through the labyrinthine passages beneath the facility. By her swift, silent motions, Seth suspected Neyvara knew every inch of this subterranean complex, from forgotten utility corridors to disused cargo lifts. A hush lingered between them, part camaraderie, part anxiety, because once they left the relative safety of the bunker, they became quarry for whichever faction decided to strike first. Neyvara led him to a dim corner with a battered door labeled in the alien script. Inside, old power cells hummed softly, fueling a small hover transport with matte black plating. She keyed a silent command into her wrist device, and the vehicle's hatch slid open, revealing an austere cockpit. This craft is shielded from standard trackers, she said. Get in. Seth obeyed, a swirl of conflicting thoughts tangling in his mind. The last time he'd willingly climbed into any conveyance belonging to this regime, he'd been under heavy guard. Now he was armed. Neyvara had handed him a sidearm and a pulse dagger, insisting he look the part if they got stopped. He settled into the co-pilot's seat while Neyvara input coordinates with cool efficiency. Where are we going? He asked. A dead zone outside the main city, she replied, flicking switches that made the cockpit glow a subdued green. A safe house older than your home planet, if rumors can be trusted. From there, we figure out who in the hierarchy can be leveraged and who needs to be exposed. The craft lifted smoothly, slicing through layers of subterranean gloom until they emerged onto a deserted landing platform. The city's spires lay in the distance, illuminated by a faint gray dawn. Seth glanced at Neyvara's profile. She was all sharp angles and focus, her scarlet skin catching the meager light. Despite the danger, she exuded a quiet confidence. On impulse, he spoke. Thank you for not letting them kill me. She gave a curt nod, her expression unreadable. Don't make me regret it, she said. Then, with a shudder of propulsion, the hover transport surged forward, skimming across the empty horizon. Your thoughts matter. Does this uneasy alliance intrigue you? Comment 1 if you're hooked, 2 if you need more suspense. The safe house was hidden beneath an abandoned terraforming outpost, relic of a war centuries older than either of them. Massive rusting pylons jutted from the ground like decaying bones, while half-buried corridors yawned into darkness. Neyvara guided the hovercraft inside, navigating around collapsed beams, until they settled in a cavernous chamber. This was used for planetary engineering, she explained as they disembarked. When the topsoil was too harsh for colonization, teams constructed these outposts to stabilize the environment. Then someone decided it was a money sink and abandoned the project. Seth listened, intrigued despite himself. The deeper they ventured, the more he suspected how thoroughly Neyvara understood the geography of her planet, or at least the region she commanded. She led him down twisting corridors, over broken catwalks, and through thick shutters that still hissed open when she applied her hand to the sensor. Finally, they arrived at a chamber lined with old radiation shielding. Dry, stale air greeted them, along with a few crates and bunk cots. Not exactly a penthouse, Seth joked, trying to lighten the mood. Neyvara unslung a backpack of supplies and tossed it onto a steel table. Luxury isn't the goal, secrecy is. She placed a portable lamp on the table, its glow revealing the tension etched into her expression. For a while, they worked in tandem, establishing a makeshift command center. Seth patched into local signals with a battered comm device, scanning for any chatter about their whereabouts. Neyvara booted up a hidden console system connected to unregistered satellites, backdoor channels that let her bypass official oversight. At one point, as they stood side by side, their shoulders brushed. Something passed between them, an unspoken recognition that they were truly in this together. She glanced at him, lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. In that fleeting moment, he noticed the depth in her crimson eyes, exhaustion, anger, and a spark of raw determination that refused to fade. Seth cleared his throat. "You're quiet." She huffed a soft breath. "I'm thinking of all the lines I've crossed. My entire career. It's built on discipline, loyalty. Now I'm an outcast in my own ranks." "Better to be an outcast than a pawn," he offered. She simply nodded, a grim acceptance falling over them. Information was their lifeline, and the console in front of Neyvara spat out coded readouts that only she could decipher with her clearance. Seth observed quietly, feeling the weight of her unwavering focus. If some hidden faction within her government wanted her gone, they'd be monitoring official channels, so she had to move like a ghost through her own network. After an hour, she leaned back, rubbing her temples. The intelligence confirms that multiple officers were given the directive to eliminate or detain me, depending on the scenario. My name has been flagged as a potential threat to internal stability. They claim I've grown too independent. Seth fiddled with a small piece of broken circuit board, turning it over in his hands. "That's a compliment, in a twisted way." "Compliment or condemnation?" Neyvara said. "It ends with me dead if I don't fight back." He watched her lips press into a thin line. "So we gather evidence. We prove they're orchestrating illegal subversions, manipulating your achievements to hide their own corruption. Then we forcibly share that proof." Neyvara's gaze sharpened. "You sound confident. I've spent my life under these people. I know how ruthless they can be." Seth set the circuit aside, leaning forward. "You shouldn't underestimate me either. I'm not your typical human liaison. I was trained to infiltrate high-level networks, to handle delicate, dangerous information. If we do this right, we won't just save your life. We might topple the entire council that's behind this." She studied him for a long beat. "Is that your real goal? To topple an alien government?" He gave a humorless laugh. "My real goal was to gather intel and get home. But now?" He shook his head. "Let's say I've developed a personal stake in keeping you alive." Her eyes narrowed as if she doubted him. But she didn't voice that doubt. Instead, she rose, an air of decision about her. "There's a secondary communications node about 20 kilometers south. It's old, predating the current systems. If I can link into it, we might funnel our proof to external channels without immediate interception." "Then let's do it," Seth said, pushing to his feet, ignoring the dull ache from his injuries. They geared up at first light, setting out on foot through the ashen plains surrounding the outpost. Seth felt the chilly air slice across his bruised skin, though the morning sunlight provided minimal warmth. Neyvara moved with a warrior's efficiency, scanning the horizon, pausing behind rocky outcroppings to ensure they remained unseen. Despite her slender build, she exuded a coiled strength that reminded him why she was so feared in the ranks. Conversation was sparse, but the tension between them was more than battlefield caution. An unspoken current lingered from the moment she'd saved him, and from countless times their gazes locked. He couldn't shake the memory of how her breath hitched when their arms brushed while prepping gear. They were two people who shouldn't trust each other, both manipulated by forces bigger than themselves. Yet they were leaning on each other for survival. Eventually, they reached an ancient maintenance hatch leading underground. Rusted metal screeched as Neyvara pried it open, revealing a narrow shaft. She dropped down gracefully, and Seth followed, landing in knee-high water. The smell of decay filled his nostrils. "Charming place," he muttered, trying not to gag. Neyvara snorted softly. "It's been abandoned for decades, but the comm node's deeper in. We'll have to wade through this." They trudged through foul-smelling water until they reached a sealed door. Neyvara entered a code, but the old lock beeped in protest. With a faint curse, she peeled away the keypad panel, reconnected a few wires, and tried again. This time, the door hissed open, revealing a corridor lined with flickering emergency lights. At the far end stood a circular chamber with a grated floor, and at its center, a terminal that looked older than half the buildings in the capital. Neyvara approached it warily. "If any part of this rusts out mid-activation, we're done." Seth shrugged, stepping up beside her. "No turning back now." He tapped a console key, and to his surprise, the node hummed to life. Data screens sputtered into existence, lines of archaic code scrawling across a battered display. "Been reading for a while? Comment 1 if you're loving the detail. 2 if you're hoping for more flashbacks or action scenes. We appreciate the feedback." Neyvara slid a small encrypted drive into a slot, her expression tense. The console responded with beeps of recognition, launching a progress bar on a dim screen. "Transferring partial files," she muttered, eyes scanning for any sign of system failure. At first, everything proceeded smoothly. The bar advanced, data funneling into clandestine channels. Then a jolt of static made the monitor flicker, and a harsh red error message replaced the calm green text. "Connection lost," the system chirped. Neyvara's face twisted in frustration. They've caught on. Either the node is compromised, or we just triggered an intrusion alert on the main network. "So they might already know we're here?" Seth asked, brow furrowing. She nodded grimly, removing the drive before it got corrupted. "Probably. We need to move." Before they made it 3 steps, the corridor lights flickered and went dark, replaced by the flicker of emergency bulbs. A low rumble vibrated beneath their feet, like a distant explosion reverberating through old tunnels. Seth's breath caught. "They're collapsing entry points." Neyvara looked down the corridor. "They mean to trap or flush us out. This entire old network can be rigged with charges if the main command wants it off limits." They sprinted back, slogging through the corridor until the water rose again around their ankles. In the gloom, the maintenance hatch they'd used was half submerged, a metal bar twisted from an impact. Seth braced his shoulder against the jammed door, shoving until it gave way. With a metallic screech, the hatch slid open enough for them to squeeze through. Just then, a distant crash made dust and debris rain down. Neyvara pointed to an alternate route. "There's a cargo tunnel behind those storage crates. If it's not caved in, we can surface in the forest outskirts." Adrenaline pounded through Seth as they scrambled up a ladder, each rung carrying them away from potential entombment. When they finally emerged into open air, the sky was bruised with storm clouds. Any illusions of safety vanished when they spotted a silent hover carrier drifting in the distance, unmarked, but definitely a sign someone was searching. They hunkered down behind a cluster of twisted trees, breath hitching in the chilly morning air. Neyvara's chest rose and fell, her uniform damp and muddy, but her gaze still razor sharp. "They're combing the area," she said, eyeing the distant carrier. "We can't outrun them on foot if they spot us." Seth pressed a hand to his side, wincing. "We need an alternate plan. You said you got partial data out, right? Maybe enough to give you leverage?" Her shoulders tensed. "Only about a third of what we have. It might not be convincing enough on its own." "Then we regroup," Seth replied, searching the horizon. "We can't go back to the outpost. Too obvious. There must be another place you know, another safe fallback." Neyvara swallowed, 1,000 decisions warring in her expression. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. There's a secluded bunker near a mountain ridge. It's old, used back in the time of my ancestors. My personal override might still grant access." They moved carefully, weaving through waist-high grasses and blackened tree stumps that dotted the landscape. Overhead, clouds thickened, threatening rain or worse. Each time they heard the distant whir of an engine, they froze, hearts hammering. It took hours of evasion, slipping across shallow ravines, ducking under half-collapsed bridges, before they reached rocky foothills. Here, ragged cliffs jutted skyward, and a hidden path wound behind a waterfall, concealed by thick moss and ancient vines. Neyvara parted the vegetation, revealing an armored hatch recessed in the stone. She tapped a code into a nearly invisible panel, and with a grinding noise, the hatch retracted. The stale smell of an untouched interior wafted out. Inside, they found a minimalistic living space that rivaled the earlier safe room, battered but intact equipment, a few sealed crates of rations, and, crucially, a small generator. Seth fiddled with the power, and soon dim lights buzzed overhead, revealing old insignias on the metal walls, perhaps from an earlier dynasty, long overshadowed by the current regime. For a moment, neither spoke. Seth ran a hand through his sweat-slick hair, tension coiled in every muscle. Neyvara exhaled, leaning her palm against the wall, collecting her thoughts. They had escaped immediate capture, but their predicament was far from resolved. "That was closer than I'd like," Neyvara finally admitted, brushing dust off her uniform. Seth managed a tight grin. "I don't think I've run that hard since I was a raw recruit." He sank onto a metal bench along the wall, gingerly probing his bruised torso. "This war of yours has a habit of making short work of me." She studied him, her crimson features still tense with adrenaline. "You keep impressing me, human. You could have deserted me in those tunnels, saved yourself. Instead, you stuck by my side." He looked up at her, eyes flicking over her angular jaw and the subtle curve of her horns, small ridges along her temples that glinted in the dim overhead light. "Deserting you wouldn't have ended well," he said simply. "Besides, I think we need each other." Something flickered in her eyes, like a glimmer of reluctant approval. She pulled out a portable med kit, nodding for him to remove the ragged jacket he'd been wearing. "Here," she said. "Let me see how bad those bruises are." Seth complied, hissing through his teeth as he lifted the fabric to reveal mottled skin around his rib cage. Neyvara knelt, her expression intent as she scanned the area, then applied a synthosalve that stung before numbing the pain. For a moment, her hand brushed his bare skin, and he felt the warmth of her palm even through the cold antiseptic gel. He tried to ignore the sudden pounding of his heart. Their gazes caught and held, the tension between them shifting from survival to something more. She cleared her throat and broke contact, busying herself with the final pass of the scanner. Shaking his head to dispel the dizziness, Seth forced a change of subject. "So, about that partial data we managed to send, if they're jamming or intercepting, how do we make sure it reaches allies who'll actually believe it?" Neyvara stood, arms folded. "We need a direct confrontation, a place where the chain of command can't simply bury the evidence. A tribunal or a council session, perhaps, where all eyes will be on them. He almost laughed. Sounds suicidal. Her red lips curved slightly. You said it yourself. We need each other to survive, and sometimes the boldest move is the only one. Pause for a second here, folks, because I have to ask. Do you think Neyvara is making the right decision trusting Seth, a human spy? Or do you feel he's still hiding something important? Things are getting tense, and their choices right now could change the fate of worlds. Comment 1 if you believe Seth genuinely wants to help Neyvara expose the conspiracy, or 2 if you think he's playing his own hidden game. While you're at it, let me know your theories on how this incredible story might end. Oh, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Your support helps bring even more captivating tales your way. Now let's dive back into the action and see what secrets get uncovered next. They spent the next day forging a plan that felt equal parts brilliant and reckless. Neyvara's rank still gave her the authority to walk into the hall of high protocol, the nerve center of her government's decision-making. Seth, meanwhile, possessed a knack for infiltration that had once earned him top honors in his own military intelligence. Together, they might breach the seat of power, place their evidence on record, and let the system's own visibility force the conspirators to react. When they finally settled on the details, exhaustion weighed on them like lead. Neyvara activated a sleeping chamber, a small alcove that sealed with an internal barrier to keep the occupants safe. She insisted Seth take it to recuperate fully. I can stand watch, she said, leaning against the console. I doubt you'd rest well otherwise. He hesitated, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. You should sleep too. Her mouth twitched. I'll manage. You survived torture and a firefight. I think you've earned a reprieve. Seth, halfway to insisting she rest, recognized that unwavering glint in her gaze. He simply nodded. All right, he said softly, retreating into the alcove. Night, if one could call it that in a hidden bunker, brought a sort of calm. Seth dozed fitfully, images of the past days swirling. Blood on metal floors, the lethal sparkle in Neyvara's eyes, the possibility of betrayal around every corner. Sometime after his dreams shifted into nightmares of entrapment, he startled awake, disoriented. Soft light flickered from the open doorway, and there she stood, arms folded, face lined with worry. You were talking in your sleep, she said quietly. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. What did I say? Something about not breaking, and a name you never mentioned to me. Seth grimaced, shaking off the memory. Probably a ghost from a past mission. Not important. They regarded each other in silence. Finally, Neyvara stepped back, letting him exit the sleeping alcove. She didn't probe further, respecting whatever boundaries he'd just erected. Instead, she offered a morsel of rehydrated rations. We'll need our energy. He accepted, their fingers brushing as he took the packet. That small contact nearly set his pulse racing again, once more aware that this red-skinned commander was more than just an ally of convenience. Rain pelted the bunker's entrance in a steady downpour by morning, turning the outside world into a haze of gray. Under the cover of that storm, they set out to hijack a secondary transport, one large enough to get them through multiple security checkpoints. Seth followed Neyvara along a slippery cliff face, the waterfall's roar masking their footsteps. She paused, scanning the horizon. Patrols have ramped up, she noted. We'll need a diversion to slip a craft from the regional hangar. As Seth tapped a handheld device that used the codes he'd gleaned from his earlier infiltration attempts. I can rig their sensors to read a false sabotage signal on the opposite side of the facility. That should pull a good chunk of the guards away. Neyvara's expression hardened with approval. Then let's do it. The plan unraveled as soon as they approached the hangar. A pair of soldiers wearing the crest of the High Council already roamed near the entrance, scanning for intruders. There was no time to retreat. Seth and Neyvara ducked behind a stack of metal crates as the soldiers' boots clanged nearer. With swift, silent motions, Neyvara eased out from cover, hooking an arm around the first soldier's neck, effectively cutting off his cry. She swept his legs out, lowering him to the ground without a sound. Meanwhile, Seth sprang toward the second, pressing a stunner to the soldier's chest. The man crumpled, eyes rolling back. Panting, they dragged the unconscious bodies behind the crates. Seth glanced sideways at Neyvara. "Impressive," he murmured, heart pounding. Her eyes glowed with adrenaline, but she said nothing, ushering him deeper into the hangar. Inside, rows of sleek transports gleamed under overhead lights. Only a handful had the advanced stealth systems needed to bypass top-level scrutiny, and they found one swiftly, its side hatch reading, "Authorized personnel only." Seth hacked the lock, the panel beeped green, and they slipped in. Neyvara took the pilot's seat, her slender fingers dancing over the controls. Within seconds, they were airborne, the cargo bay sealed behind them. The hangar's klaxons blared, but by then, it was too late for anyone to stop them from hurtling into the storm-lashed skies. Enjoying the ride? Comment 1 if the tension's your favorite element. 2 if you want even more about their pasts. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The city rose beneath them in a futuristic sprawl, monolithic spires shrouded by the storm. Neyvara angled the craft toward the towering structure at its center, a massive citadel that housed the Hall of High Protocol. Normally, it was the heart of her domain, the place she'd roamed freely as an esteemed officer. Now, entering its airspace was akin to stepping onto a battlefield with a target pinned between her shoulder blades. "We'll land on the tertiary pad," she said, voice taut with focus. "I still have the highest level codes, which might hold for a few minutes of confusion before they realize my status is compromised." Seth stood behind her chair, bracing himself as crosswinds buffeted the craft. "Are you sure we won't face immediate arrest?" "Fairly sure," she muttered, adjusting their landing vector. "If anyone tries, well, you know how to handle yourself." They descended in a swirl of rain, thrusters kicking up a spray of water as they settled on the pad. Almost instantly, an automated greeting sequence broadcast over the comm, welcoming General Neyvara back from her assignment. She winced, flipping off the switch. They exited into the downpour. Two stunned maintenance workers froze at the edge of the pad, but Neyvara's uniform and decisive stride left them uncertain whether they should challenge her. Seth could almost see the wheels turning in their heads. If they confronted the general and she wasn't actually stripped of rank, it'd cost them dearly. Neyvara led Seth through a back corridor, passing scanning stations and guard posts. Each time, her code granted passage, though the final checkpoint beeped with an ominous alert. The board operator behind the console looked at Neyvara, about to ask questions, until she fixed him with a glare that could melt steel. They reached a set of heavy doors etched with symbols from Neyvara's heritage, a circle and a flame, representing authority. "Beyond this," she said in a low voice, "sits the High Council's tribunal chamber. All major hearings take place here, and records are automatically transcribed into a central archive. If we can present our evidence in that space, they can't silence us without raising suspicion, at least not instantly." Seth nodded, flipping the safety off on his sidearm. The real battle was about to begin. When those doors swung open, a hush fell over the marbled hall. A semicircle of council members in ornate cloaks stared down from elevated seats, their expressions cycling between disbelief, anger, and alarm. 12 individuals sat there, some of the most powerful in Neyvara's civilization. "General Neyvara," rasped the first counselor, a tall, gaunt figure with silver markings along his temples. "We were not informed of your return." Seth stood at Neyvara's side, doing his best to mirror the posture of a high-ranking aide. He understood enough of her people's formalities to remain silent unless spoken to. Neyvara's voice carried through the chamber with icy resolve. I come unannounced because certain parties here have decided to cast me as a traitor. I have evidence that multiple counselors conspired to have me removed. She brandished a data rod, stepping forward. The tribunal erupted in murmurs, and several counselors shot to their feet. One, a woman with intricate tattoos across her cheekbones, shouted, "Outrageous! She attempts a coup!" Seth couldn't help but notice security guards along the periphery shifting anxiously. If they acted, this entire confrontation could devolve into violence within seconds. Neyvara keyed the data rod into a console at the center dais. Instantly, screens around the hall flickered to life, displaying logs of covert communications. Lines of text scrolled across multiple monitors, dates, times, instructions for contingencies regarding General Neyvara's loyalty. "This is an internal matter," barked the gaunt counselor, casting a furtive glance at a comrade. "You dare barge in with stolen data? You yourself are guilty of insubordination." Neyvara stood firm. "If protecting my own life from an illegal directive is insubordination, then I stand guilty. But your hidden orders are now public, streaming to the official record. Try burying that." Heart thumping, Seth observed the shift in the guard's stance. They were uneasy, likely loyal to Neyvara as a renowned war hero. The conspirators realized they couldn't just have her dragged away without risking a backlash from the rank and file. One counselor rose, eyes glinting with malice. "Arrest her for treason!" But not a single guard moved. Seth exchanged a glance with Neyvara. They were at a stalemate, for now. The tension in the tribunal chamber crackled like a live wire. Counselors argued among themselves, some outraged, others eyeing the evidence with dawning fear. Neyvara's eyes swept the room, calculating which of them might still be on her side. Seth felt the weight of 1,000 stares, but he refused to lower his gaze. After everything, his capture, torture, near escape, he was determined to see this through. "I demand we adjourn and investigate in private," snapped a counselor with a gold-embossed robe, his voice quivering. "This is a matter for closed session inquiry." Neyvara shook her head. "No more hiding. This recording is already in motion, automatically archived. Unless you want to destroy your own record-keeping system, it's done." The woman with the facial tattoos, one of the most hawkish counselors, if rumor held true, leaned forward. "And who is that?" She jabbed a finger at Seth. "This human has no standing in our proceedings." Seth stepped closer to Neyvara, shoulders squared. "I'm only here to protect the truth. If you take her down, the rest of the galaxy will learn why." The hawkish counselor's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, perhaps realizing the precarious balance. Outside, thunder rumbled, and the overhead lights flickered. It felt ominously symbolic. Eventually, an older counselor who had remained silent throughout lifted his hand. "We must weigh the evidence," he said, voice calmer. "General Neyvara's history of service is exemplary, and if her claims have substance, we cannot ignore them." To Seth's surprise, some counselors nodded. Perhaps they weren't all part of the conspiracy. Some might even hold genuine respect for Neyvara. "Then weigh it quickly," Neyvara said, holding her head high. "If you find me guilty of imaginary crimes, so be it. But at least the entire world will know how far you stooped to remove me." In the hush that followed, the meaning was clear. If they executed Neyvara, they'd confirm every suspicion about corruption. If they let her walk away, they had to accept the data's implications, that a significant part of their leadership plotted illegally against one of their own generals. The standstill lasted an excruciating minute. Then, under the watchful eyes of the guards and the swirling suspicion among the counselors, the hawkish woman leaned into her microphone. "We will permit a formal review," she said reluctantly, her tone brittle. Under the ancient rules, General Neyvara will be placed in an observation suite, her credentials suspended until the inquiry is complete. She shot a venomous glance at Seth, as though wishing she could order him dragged away by the hair. The human is to remain off military premises, pending verification of his claims. No one missed the fact that this was a desperate compromise, a chance to keep Neyvara from further damaging secrets while the conspirators maneuvered behind the scenes. But a flicker of triumph lit the general's crimson eyes, and Seth nearly breathed a sigh of relief. They'd bought time, a precarious victory, but a victory nonetheless. As soon as the council moved to recess, the guard stepped in to escort Neyvara and Seth out. A hush followed them through the corridors, officers and staff parting to let them pass. Even those who had once jeered or eyed Seth with contempt seemed uncertain now, fear and awe mingling on their faces. "Observation suite," Seth murmured under his breath. "Sounds like house arrest, if you ask me." Neyvara gave him a sidelong glance as they approached a private lift. "It's better than a firing squad." Her stoic acceptance rattled something in him. Despite all the strides she'd made in proving her innocence, the wheels of bureaucracy could still grind her down. And as he stepped into the lift beside her, he knew that the battle for their lives, and the truth, was far from over. The doors slid shut, leaving the rest of the council behind as they soared to an upper floor. In that moment, Seth allowed himself a single deep breath. They had survived, which was more than he dared hope a few days ago. Neyvara's posture relaxed a fraction, though her eyes still held a restless fire, a warning that the real fight had only just begun. They were escorted to a private ward, essentially luxurious confinement, where the towering windows offered a panoramic view of the city's spires. Guards lingered outside, unsure whether they were protecting Neyvara or monitoring her. Either way, she and Seth were locked in together. "That could have gone much worse," Seth admitted, sinking into a sleek sofa near the window. Neyvara stared through the glass at the twinkling skyline. "I planted the seeds. If any counselor has a conscience left, they'll see I'm telling the truth." He stood, crossing the room to her side. "And if they don't?" Her reflection in the glass looked weary but resolute. "Then we fight again, expose them by force if necessary, but I doubt the entire council will align against me. Some might be biding their time, waiting to see which side wins." Seth studied her profile, the slope of her horns, the faint tension in her jaw, the swirling mixture of vulnerability and power she embodied. "You know," he said quietly, "there's something almost poetic about this. Two people who should be enemies, now standing together in front of everything that wants to tear us apart." Neyvara turned slightly, and for a moment he swore her gaze softened. "Have you regretted it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Working with me, trusting me this far?" He thought back to the torture chamber, the safe rooms, the tunnel escapes, and the heated, unspoken moments that nearly broke them in other ways. "No," he said, "never." A flicker of relief crossed her face, gone as quickly as it came. She reached out, resting one warm palm against his chest. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, despite all the violence they'd endured. "I can't sit down after last night," she murmured, half smiling at a private memory. "Everything we've gone through has me on edge, but at least we're here." He dipped his head, unable to look away from her. "At least we're alive, and we're not finished." Neyvara nodded, her voice quiet and sure. "No, not by a long shot." Somewhere beyond those glass walls, entire fleets could be mobilizing, entire conspiracies unraveling. But for now, they stood side by side, determined to reshape a future neither of them had dared dream possible, together.